On March 13, 1962, a stack of official papers landed on the polished desk of U.S. Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara. The pages were crisp, covered in neat typewritten paragraphs and stamped with the seal of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. At first glance, it looked like routine military planning, the kind of bureaucratic proposal that passed through his office every week. But this one was different. Hidden among the polite language and numbered bullet points was a plan so audacious, so morally explosive, that even in the tense, paranoid climate of the Cold War, it seemed almost unbelievable. The plan called for acts of terror, hijackings, bombings, staged attacks, not against an enemy's cities, but against American citizens. Innocent men, women, and children would die. Ships would be sunk. Buildings would be destroyed. And all of it would be blamed on one country, Cuba. The reasoning was as cold as it was clear. If the American public would not support a war against Fidel Castro, the military would give them a reason to demand one. The operation had a name, a code that would become infamous decades later: Operation Northwoods. Welcome to Lore of the Multiverse, where we dig into the stories that lie buried in classified files, whispered rumors, and half-forgotten history, the ones that blur the line between paranoia and reality. If you love stories that force you to question what you thought you knew about the past, subscribe and join us. Tonight, we're opening the file on one of the most chilling what-ifs in U.S. history, a plan that, if approved, might have set the world on fire. To understand how such a proposal could even exist, you have to step into the mindset of 1962. The Cold War wasn't just an abstract geopolitical rivalry. It was a daily, ever-present fear that the world could end in a flash of nuclear light. The United States and the Soviet Union were locked in a zero-sum struggle for global dominance, and Cuba had suddenly become a key piece on the chessboard. Only 3 years earlier, Fidel Castro's revolution had ousted US-backed dictator Fulgencio Batista. Almost overnight, Cuba aligned itself with Moscow, becoming a Soviet foothold just 90 miles from Florida. The failed Bay of Pigs invasion in April 1961, a CIA-led attempt to overthrow Castro, had been a humiliation for the Kennedy administration. The fiasco not only failed to topple Castro, it made him stronger, turning him into a symbol of defiance against American power. Inside the Pentagon, the mood was grim. Military leaders believed Castro's Cuba was a dagger pointed at the heart of the United States, and they were furious that the president had refused to commit U.S. forces openly during the Bay of Pigs. For them, regime change in Havana wasn't just desirable, it was necessary. But the political problem was obvious. The American public had no appetite for another foreign war, especially one that could bring the Soviets into direct conflict with the U.S. The Joint Chiefs of Staff came up with a solution, and it was darker than anyone outside the military could imagine. Their idea was simple: if the public wouldn't support a war, the government could create the conditions for one. The Northwoods plan laid it out in painstaking detail. There would be a campaign of false flag operations, attacks engineered by the U.S. military, but made to look like they were carried out by Cuba. The list of proposals was chilling. A U.S. Navy ship in Guantanamo Bay could be sunk and blamed on Cuban sabotage. Civilian airliners could be hijacked or swapped in midair for drones and detonated over the ocean, with passenger lists prepared to simulate casualties. Bombs could be planted in Miami, in Washington, D.C., even in U.S. military bases, then discovered to have Cuban fingerprints all over them. One idea was to stage funerals for fake victims, complete with grieving families and media coverage, to inflame public outrage. Another suggested creating a communist Cuban terror campaign, in Florida and elsewhere, targeting not just military assets but civilians, to paint Cuba as reckless and dangerous. These were not vague, drunken musings scribbled on a napkin. The proposals were drafted formally, typed up, and approved by the most senior military leadership in the country. The cover page bore the signature of General Lyman Lemnitzer, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the highest-ranking military officer in the United States. The intended outcome was clear: a wave of outrage would sweep the nation. Politicians would demand justice. The public would rally around the idea of toppling Castro, believing it was a necessary and defensive action. And when the U.S. military invaded Cuba, it would be seen not as an act of aggression, but as a righteous response. But the plan never became reality. When Operation Northwoods was presented to President John F. Kennedy, he rejected it outright. Kennedy was already wary of his military advisors, particularly after the Bay of Pigs debacle. He reportedly had little trust in Lemnitzer and the Joint Chiefs, and Northwoods may have been the final nail in the coffin. By the end of 1962, Lemnitzer was reassigned to a NATO post in Europe, effectively sidelined from direct influence over U.S. policy toward Cuba. But while the plan was dead, its existence remained hidden. For over 30 years, Operation Northwoods stayed buried in classified archives. Only in the mid-1990s did the truth emerge, thanks to the Assassination Records Review Board, a government panel set up to release documents related to the Kennedy assassination. Researchers combing through files stumbled upon the Northwoods papers, and what they read was jaw-dropping. Here was irrefutable proof that, at the height of the Cold War, the U.S. military's top brass had seriously considered killing American citizens, or at least faking their deaths, to create a pretext for war. When journalists published the story, it caused a ripple of outrage and disbelief. To some, Northwoods was proof of what they'd long suspected, that governments are capable of manufacturing consent through deception, even at the highest levels. Conspiracy theorists seized on the document, holding it up as a smoking gun for their claims about other historical events. To others, the fact that Kennedy rejected the plan was reassuring. It showed, they argued, that civilian oversight worked, that even the most dangerous proposals could be stopped. But that interpretation raises its own unsettling question. If this one was stopped, how many others weren't? The truth is, Operation Northwoods fits into a broader historical pattern. The Gulf of Tonkin incident in 1964, which escalated the Vietnam War, remains controversial, with evidence suggesting the second attack may never have happened. Other alleged operations, from the British in the Middle East to Soviet activities in Eastern Europe, have hinted at the same willingness to manipulate events for political ends. Northwoods is unique, though, in that we have the actual paperwork. There's no debate over whether the proposal existed, it's there, in black and white, signed and dated. Today, the Northwoods file sits in the National Archives, available for anyone to read. It's a reminder that the world we see on the news might not be the whole story. That behind the speeches and press releases, plans are made in rooms without windows, by people whose names we may never know, with consequences that could change history in an instant. It also forces us to ask a chilling question. If the Joint Chiefs in 1962 could propose something like this, what might a future crisis bring? Would the lines we think are unbreakable, between truth and lies, war and peace, hold under pressure? Or would they be crossed again, in the name of security, patriotism, or survival? In the end, Operation Northwoods is both a cautionary tale and a historical anomaly. It's a glimpse into the machinery of power at its most cynical, and a testament to the fragility of the safeguards meant to keep that power in check. And maybe the most haunting part is this: the only reason we know about it at all is because, for once, the answer was no. If you found this deep dive into one of the most disturbing what-ifs of the Cold War fascinating, hit like, subscribe to Lore of the Multiverse, and share your thoughts in the comments. Could something like Northwoods happen again? Or have we truly learned from the past? Until next time, stay curious, and question everything.